You are listening to the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com. And we are coming to you live from the PMI Global Congress 2014 in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm sitting here in the exhibition hall with Elizabeth Larson from Watermark Learning. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi, Cornelius.
We've had you on before about requirements of all things.
Yes.
Yes, and we're going to be talking about requirements again.
I'm delighted to be back.
Yeah, wonderful. But before we talk about requirements, let's talk about requirements. And in particular, your presenter here, did PMI have any specific requirements for you about what the presentation had to be like? Was there any kind of sort of frame of mind they wanted you to be in?
There was. Now, while there were no requirements for the length of the presentation as far as the number of slides or what they needed to look like, there was a requirement that it be interactive. And that's my presentation
Oh, so group interaction.
Yes,
that was a requirement.
Yes, by interaction, exercises, discussions with the group, get the group engaged.
Okay. Little difficult here with the interview with the people who are sitting at home, but we're going to do our best anyway to get them engaged, at least mentally. So why should we manage requirements? What's the importance?
Yeah, why indeed should we spend the time when there aren't enough hours in the day to manage our projects? Why should we manage requirements? Basically, it comes down to the fact, and there have been so many studies and so many reports, if we don't get our requirements right, we're not going to get our projects right. We're not going to have project success. And so we really do need to learn how to get our requirements right. Requirements management helps us do that.
Absolutely. And this plays very much into the statements from other interview guests that I've had here at the Congress. Some people say we have to define the scope up first up. If we don't have the scope defined correctly, we will fail. Others, like you, they use the word requirements. We need the requirements to be correct. Otherwise, we will fail on our project. So this really, it's a theme that I'm seeing emerging here in the interviews that we're doing. What is the definition of requirements management?
That's a great question. Requirements management is about planning requirements. It's about analyzing requirements and communicating requirements and monitoring against our plan, and about managing changes. That's a little bit different from business analysis, and there's a lot of discussion about business analysis. While business analysis does all of those things, in addition, we are determining the business need, what business problem are we trying to solve, and recommending viable solutions. So business analysis actually starts prior to the project beginning and extends beyond the project. There is that overlap with the planning and the analyzing and the communicating and the monitoring and the managing changes.
Okay, so business analysis starts before the requirements happen or need to be elicited, but oftentimes is it not the job of the business analysts to elicit the requirements as well?
The requirements can be elicited by any practitioner who does the work of
a business analyst.
Exactly. A lot of project managers actually function.
One of them.
A lot of them, present company included, operate in the role of a business analyst. My title might be project manager, but I need to have that hybrid role where I also get involved in business analysis. There's a lot of overlap between business analysis and requirements management. Both are about the elicitation, the documentation, the modeling of requirements.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, requirements management is a subset of business analysis. That's one way to look at it. I don't know if you're familiar with the PMI 2014 Pulse of the Profession. It's a report that came out. They interviewed a lot of organizations. And in that report, in the introduction, they talk about how requirements management is a subset of business analysis. And that's why I say business analysis starts prior to the project beginning. We end up with the business need and the business case, which are input into project initiation, as we know. And there's a piece of it that extends to evaluation beyond.
Do we need a requirements management plan?
We need to give thought to how we're going to get through our requirements activities. It could be a formal plan that's documented and signed off, or it can be agreement between the team members. Hey, how are we going to do this? Oh, we're going to be working on an agile project, so we're going to write up our requirements as user stories and get them prioritized on product backlog, or we're going to get through them in a very formal way. So we have to give that thought. We're not talking about, and the presentation doesn't talk about the specific elements or components of a requirements management plan.
While we're talking about the requirements management plan, at some point the requirements, they have been elicited, they have been written down, now they're set in stone, and they will never ever change.
Right.
So how do we deal with changes? How do we deal with scope creep when it comes to the plan of managing requirements?
Right. So one of the tips that I give in the presentation is that I would recommend baselining sooner rather than later, and it doesn't mean that things aren't going to change. But if we can recognize a change and we can manage that change, again, it might be that we go up formally 25 levels to a change control board, or it might be that the change goes to a product owner for inclusion in the project that we're working on. But if we can recognize a change and manage that change and get approval from the business for that change, we can actually prevent scope creep. Because scope creep, unmanaged, unauthorized change is really different from saying, hey, we know changes are going to happen. We welcome the changes, and this is how we're going to deal with them.
You said you recommend baselining as soon as possible. What was the soonest you have ever baselined?
2 weeks.
2 weeks?
2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. As a project manager, in my over 15 years as a project manager, one of the traps that I fell into was saying we're going to baseline our requirements after our business analysis phase. And so on a large project, as we were going through business analysis, the requirements grew. The business issues grew. We never thought we would get done with resolving the business issues, so it was months until we could baseline requirements. The executives didn't like that because all of a sudden what we thought was very small, great big project. I recommend that, again, it's really important. Baseline to me, what it helps with is recognizing a change, getting our arms around this whole set of requirements, as long as we have the attitude that we welcome changes. If we baseline it, if we can recognize a change, if we follow whatever process we said we were going to use to manage those changes, get whatever approvals, I don't want that decision on my shoulders. Either as a business analyst or as project manager, I don't want to make the decision, yeah, that's a great new requirement or not. But I do want to recognize, yep, this is a little bit different. That's fine. This is great. Let's figure out how we're going to, is it going to be part of the project or not? Let's get people together to analyze our benefits, our costs, the impacts, and let's see whether or not, sponsor, you want to include it in the project.
One thing that I think has come out in our discussion now is when it comes to requirements management, you don't seem to mind what the project management methodology is in the background because you have freely switched from agile back to waterfall to agile back to waterfall. So this is a completely different beast. Requirements management has to happen. Requirements elicitation has to happen, no matter if you're using whatever your flavor of methodology might be.
Exactly. These are good, solid project principles. They've been around for a long, long time. And I will tell you that when I have not managed requirements, I've had a disaster on my hand. And that's true for Agile and it's true for Waterfall. Good, solid principles. How we go about doing these things might be different, but they work on all projects.
Let's talk about how we're going to be doing these things, because in your presentation, you offer 3 time savings techniques. They are traceability, divide and groom, and then finally iterative elicitation and modeling. Let's take a quick look at each of these and maybe you can tell us, how they're being used. So what is traceability? How do I use it?
From my perspective, traceability is the premier requirements management technique. And what it is it's looking at every requirement and tracing it back up to its source, to its lineage. So if you will, we're tracing every requirement to the business need. What business problem is it solving? To the business objectives and to the project objectives. And if a requirement comes in and it doesn't link up, if it's not helping to solve the business problem, it doesn't align with the project objectives and the business objectives, it's not part of this project. Might be a great requirement, it's not part of this project. How does it save time? First of all, it actually really helps prevent scope creep. because again, if the alignment isn't there, it's not part of the project. It also helps ensure that requirements are defined completely and correctly because we trace high-level requirements to detail back up the requirements among themselves. And it helps ensure that what was approved originally is actually delivered at the end by, as we're going through the project and developing and creating work products or artifacts, we need to make sure that every one of those links back to the approved requirements. How does it save time? It prevents gaps. Those gaps, those hidden requirements, tend to be the ones that are steeped in dependency. They're hard to retrofit. It's going to cost lots of money. And again, when I haven't done traceability, I've said I don't have time to do traceability. The projects have gotten into trouble.
Right. And I think with traceability, you can also see what you have covered or not. You have 10 business goals, and suddenly you notice, wait a minute, goal number 9.
Right.
No requirements. What's going on here? Right?
Exactly.
And
perfect.
so it's a one-to-many and a many-to-one relationship.
Perfect. I like to think of it as bidirectional, but it's really multidirectional.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Second technique is divide and groom. Now, I know the term grooming from agile and backlog grooming. Does that have to do with that?
It sure does. Because regardless of whether we're working on an agile project or a non-agile project, we have to get from high level, we need to get the detail. We need to understand the requirement well enough so that we can estimate it and actually develop it.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's a user story or however we want to write the requirement, we need to understand it. We need that detail.
What's the dividing part of this from the
Okay.
divide and groom?
Okay, so again, whether it's agile or not, sometimes when we start out, we have very large requirements. It's
Yes.
kind of like in agile, we call them epics. Okay, and those epics are very large. Once we get around to them and we say, yep, we want to start working on this one, they're kind of like a placeholder to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And again, on a regular non-agile project, a waterfall project, it's the same thing. Okay, now we better look at this one. We take it and we break it into smaller, more manageable requirements. They all link up to the high-level epic. But I think Agile absolutely has it right. We take these large epics and break them into stories.
Right. So how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Right. Exactly.
So we break down large requirements, we divide them, we make them smaller
make them-
so that we can
and then we can
groom
groom
them
them.
and work on them individually.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And lastly, the third time-saving technique was iterative elicitation and modeling. So iterative means we're doing this again and again and again. Elicitation is you talk to the business, you try to find out from them what they're doing. And I can't really explain the modeling part. So
Okay.
there's your cue.
Okay. So this I know for absolute sure that if we don't ask the right questions, we're not going to get our project right. We're not going to get the requirements right. Modeling helps us ask those right questions. If we don't model, we are not going to know what questions to ask.
So modeling is a way of asking the right questions and not developing a model of our final solution.
It is a model. It's several models.
Oh, it's several
It
models.
is
Okay.
several models. So in order to begin our modeling, we have to ask some questions.
Yes.
And so the iterative part is, so we ask a few questions that enables us to model. What do I mean by model? What are people doing? A process model. What are they doing today? How is that going to change going forward? In order to do our business processes, most of us need data. Data supports our business
Right.
processes, and so data modeling is really important. The touch point between our business process and our data is interaction. How am I going to interact? What am I going to do on my smartphone? Or what am I going to do to get into a web page? That interaction is a different kind of model. And finally, the user interface is going to be, what is this screen or the web page going to look
Right.
like?
So you're taking the requirements elicitation, you make
Developing
a
the
model, you make a straw man, you
a picture,
whatever
a
it
picture.
can be.
People
You
love pictures.
show it to your customer, and he goes, not what I wanted.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Let's go back to the requirements. Let's define them
Exactly.
better because obviously the way we had it didn't work, and that way you iteratively figure out what it is and you develop the model in that way. Wonderful.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So, what would be your top 2 recommendations to our listeners? Let's say all of them are active project managers. They have their projects, they have their requirements, and suddenly they go, Yeah, you know what? I didn't really focus on the requirements as much as I should have. What are your top two requirements? If they get back to the office today or tomorrow, when they look at their requirements, what should they be doing? Where should they be focusing?
Again, those techniques I think are really important. Absolutely traceability. I mean, I've gotten burned way too often by not doing traceability. That's absolutely something I would recommend that project managers, even if you don't do the work, understand the concept of traceability, why it's important, and make sure that it gets done on your projects. So I think traceability is really, really important from a requirements management perspective for all the reasons that I mentioned before. And definitely the understanding, it's been so interesting here talking to so many project managers, and it's such a big aha, the concept of these visuals, the models, and how that plays into elicitation has been like this huge light bulb to people as they've talked about it. And so the idea of knowing what questions to ask the right questions by either, again, project managers, either you do the work or just make sure that it gets done, pull in the right people, it doesn't matter what their title is, to make sure that grooming can take place. And because I can't think of a better way to groom than by asking the right questions and modeling.
When you started working on the paper, on the presentation here for the Congress, what was the wisdom that you wanted people to take home when they walked out of your room after your presentation? What did you want to give that they take with them?
Again, to get back to the fact that without the requirements, they're not going to get the project right. I wanted to give them some techniques to help them to get their requirements right, to nail down the requirements. And so I wanted them to walk away with the room with some practical techniques that are going to help them get the requirements right.
Excellent. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Cornelius.